Hey students, go ahead and put away your devices and have your pencil out and your notebook to page 17 and get some glue. Pause the video, and once you're ready, we come back to it. All right, so today we're talking about changing in elevation. Our goal is to understand how to add positive and negative numbers in general. Basically, we're just going to continue what we're doing. All right, so, okay. All right, so we're going to do this one kind of on your own. I want you to think it through, and then you're going to talk it out. The first one is the temperature was -5 degrees. Then the temperature rose 5 degrees. Pause the video and think this through. Okay, now go ahead and talk about it with your small group. Temperature was -5 degrees and then rose 5 degrees. Talk it out. When you're ready, go ahead and share out what that means. All right, the next one. A climber was 30 feet above sea level, then she descended 30 feet. What does that mean? Think about it. When you're ready, talk about it as a group and then share it out. Pause the video, and then when you're ready to move on, you can go on to the next one. All right, so now we're going to talk about what's the opposite of. What's the opposite of running 150 feet east? You should have said running 150 feet west. What's the opposite of jumping down 10 steps? That's right, jumping up 10 steps. What's the opposite of pouring 8 gallons of water into a fish tank? It should be draining 8 gallons of water from the fish tank. There are many situations involving changes in quantities where we can represent the opposite action with an opposite value. We're going to investigate that more in this lesson. So, you are going to need page 17 of your red notebook, and you're going to put the paper from page 17, go ahead and glue it into page 17 of your red notebook, and then we're going to go over this together. So pause the video, and when you're ready, come back. All right, so we're talking about mountains and caves. A mountaineer is someone who climbs mountains, and a spelunker is someone who explores caves and caverns. Hopefully you've had a chance to either climb a mountain or go spelunking. I know going to Mammoth Cave is one of those really cool ones. I'm from Eastern Kentucky, so we climb a lot of mountains where I'm from. And so I've actually had a chance to do both of these. So let's look at this here. You've got the materials in front of you, so we're going to use it to answer those questions. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to kind of work on it as on your own. Once you finish working through, and if you're finished a little bit earlier, a little bit later, that's totally fine. Start talking with your small group over your answers. Okay, so if we're starting elevation is 200 and we're adding 70 feet, what's our final elevation? It should be 270. If our starting elevation is 200 and we are adding negative 120 or subtracting 120 feet, then our final elevation should be 80. Then the next one, it says 200 and then our final elevation is 300. So what's our change? Our change is we are adding 100. If we're starting from 200 and we're going to 110, then our change is negative 90 or minus 90. And if our starting elevation is 200 and our final elevation is 35.2, then our change has to be negative 164.8. So go ahead and check those answers, correct any mistakes that you made before moving on. Pause the video if you need to. All right, so now I'm going to give you a chance to do this one. If you haven't already, pause the video, go through each one of these to find your final elevation or your change. Again, pause the video and come back when you're ready. All right, so if our starting elevation is -20 and we're changing -15, then our final elevation should be -35. If our starting elevation is -20 and we're adding 130, then our final elevation should be 110. If our starting elevation is -20 and our final elevation is 61, then our change is that we're adding 81 because we're going from negative to the positive, so we have to add a lot of positives to get to positive 61. If our starting elevation is -20 and our final elevation is -5, then we are adding 15. If our starting elevation is -20 and our final elevation is -50, then we are adding -30 or we're subtracting 30. If our starting elevation is -20 and we're adding 27.5, then our final elevation is going to be 7.5. Sorry about this. And the last one, if our starting elevation is -20 and our final elevation is 73.5, then our change is 93.5. Pause the video to check your answers. Ask any questions that you have before moving on. All right, so what happens when two numbers have the same sign? So like 200 plus 70, 270. 200 plus 100, 300. -20, -15, -35. -20, -30 is -50. So if the sign's the same. So when the sign is the same, look at them. You're just simply adding them together and then keeping the sign that they have. Adding them together, keeping the sign they have. Adding them together, keeping the sign that they have. Adding them together, keeping the sign they have. However, what happens when you have two add-ins that have opposite signs? And the number of the larger magnitude, and remember magnitude is the number that's whose absolute value, it's the absolute value. And if its magnitude is positive. So look at this. We have positive 200, negative 120. Look at it. It's 80. Well, we didn't add those two numbers together. What we really did was subtracted them. And the final was positive because the bigger number was positive. 200, negative 90, positive 110. We just subtracted them. 200, and then this one over here was 32.5. And what we had to do here is 200, and we subtracted these two, and it was a positive value. Negative 20, positive 130. So you would subtract them, get 110, and the greater value is positive. So on each one of these, the greater value is positive, and the final elevation was positive. What happens when two add-ins have opposite signs and the number with the larger magnitude is negative? Go ahead and talk about that. Pause the video if you need to. So when we add two numbers with the same sign, the arrows that represent them point them in the same direction. We will put the arrows tip to tail, and we will say the sum has the same sign. Then we've talked about that in the last lesson. You start with 0, you go to 4, you add 3 more, you get to 7. You start with 0, you go to -5, you subtract or add -4 more, you get to -9. To find the sum, we add the magnitudes and we give the correct sign. For example, -5 plus -4 is 5 plus 4, and it's negative. But on the other hand, when we add two numbers with different signs, we want to subtract their magnitudes because the arrows are pointing in the opposite direction. And then you want to give the sign of the number with the larger magnitude. And I say the sign of the number with the bigger, like sign of the bigger number. And we know that it's not bigger value. And I love the way it says here on the larger magnitude, the bigger absolute value. So for example, -5 plus 12 is 12 minus 5. Well, 12 minus 5 is 7. And the bigger magnitude is 12, so it'd be positive. So how can you tell when the sum will be 0? So look at this one here. You have plus 200 minus 200, it's 0. Negative 20, positive 20, it's 0. So when they're adding them together, if they're the same on opposite sides. Now we've got finding some sums here. I want you to try to do this in your head. I'm going to pause the video and give yourself a minute to try these in your head. Okay, so what I would do here is I would do 30 plus 5 is 35, and then negative 35 and positive 35 makes 0. On this one, I would add together negative 15, negative 0.15, and negative 0.85, and I would get 1 whole, because that is 0.15 and 0.85 equals 1. So it would be negative 1 whole. So this is negative 1 plus 12.5, so then that would be positive 11.5. And then this one right here, you have a positive and you have a negative. However, they don't have the same fractions. So I would make this one 2/4 because 1/2 is 2/4. 2/4 and negative 3/4. You're going to subtract them. 3/4 minus 2/4 is 1/4. And because the bigger magnitude is negative, it'd be negative 1/4. Oh. So see if you can do this in your head without a calculator. All right, so on this one, here's what I would do. Positive 54, negative 54, cancels out. Positive 43, negative 43, cancels out. Positive 32, negative 32, cancels out. Same thing with the positive and negative 21 and the positive and negative 10. And so the answer should be 0. All right, so let's not create a number line. What I want you to do now is I want you to choose 2 objects of different lengths. So for example, you've got a pen and you've got a glue stick. And let's make the pen longer than the glue stick, okay? So you've got a pen, you've got a glue stick. Pen is longer than the glue stick. So A is the pen, B is the glue stick. Go ahead and label that in your head. A is the pen, B is the glue stick. All right, so now fill this out. Pause the video and then come back when you are ready for it. Okay, so if A is the pen and B is the glue stick, then A is going to be greater than B. Negative A and negative B, if we negated both of them, then negative A would actually be less than negative B when you put them both in the negatives, because remember, they go the opposite side. What if you had A plus negative A and B plus negative B? Remember, when you have the additive inverse, you're going to get 0, and the additive inverse is going to be 0. So these would actually be equal to each other. A plus negative B and B plus negative A. So now we have the larger value plus this basically minus the smaller one. So you're going to be able with a positive number here, right? And then B plus negative A, remember this is negative, and this is larger than this one. So this is going to be a negative number, and this is going to be a positive number. So this one would be greater than. And then the opposite, if A plus negative B and negative A plus B, let's see, we're still having the smaller number over here. Oh, A plus negative B and then negative A plus B. It's the same thing. Negative A plus B, it would still be greater than, because these are the same as these. All right, so check out what all we've learned today. We learned to add 2 numbers that have the same sign. We add their magnitudes and keep the sign the same. To add 2 numbers with different signs, we subtract their magnitudes or their absolute values and use the sign of the numbers with the larger magnitude. And when adding number to the opposite, the sum is 0. These are called additive inverses. You might want to write that word down, additive inverse. So, what's the opposite of 5? Negative 5. What's the opposite of negative 8? Positive 8. What's the opposite of 1/3? Negative 1/3, unless you were doing multiplicative. We're doing additive inverse here. And what's the opposite of negative 0.6? Positive 0.6. What's the sum of a number and its opposite? There's only one answer, and that answer is 0. The number and its opposite would be 0. So what I want to make sure that you know how to do is explain how to add two numbers with the same sign. Pause the video, share out with a partner, and then come back. Now what I want you to do is explain how to add two numbers with different signs. Add two numbers with different signs. Same thing, share out in your small group or with a partner. Pause the video and then come back. All right, so today's goal was I can understand how to add positive and negative numbers in general, and especially looking at those multiplicative inverses. Hopefully this video helped you. And we've got a, if you have time, we've got a cool down. If not, we'll work on this one tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.